Palestinian state as long as there is an Israeli state?
The first question was
Your family. You can
Okay, so the first question, how did my family respond, and how I responded when my sister's little girl was killed. I mean, there are no words that can describe what a breakdown it is, what a horrible thing it is when a child dies. I mean, you see this small coffin being led to the ground. I mean, but we were always a family that was involved, a political family in many, many ways, even though I was not engaged at all at that time. And when my sister first came out to talk to people after this happened, she was asked about retaliation and revenge and all that sort of thing. And how do we punish them and that sort of thing. And I talk about it in great detail in the book. And her response was really what drove me and many others into thinking about this, as opposed to just feeling the pain. And she said, first of all, don't talk to me about killing more people. This idea of revenge, this idea of retaliation, that we kill people in response for a child's death, is a sick idea. Don't talk to me about that. That's not my thing. That's not something that needs to happen. Number one. Number two, we want to find out who's responsible. We want to know who's responsible for all these deaths. Who is it that is maintaining this brutal oppression of another people? Who is it that is denying Palestinians water and travel and life and shooting young Palestinian children in their schools and blowing up their homes? Who is doing all of this? We, the Israelis, are doing it. And she said very clearly that she holds, and her husband, the Israeli government, directly responsible for her daughter's death. This is what happens when you maintain such brutality. This is the response. And in many cases, young innocent civilians, young innocent people die. So this, was also a big shock to hear that. And then I was living in the U.S. already at the time, and I was looking for a way to get engaged, and I found a group of a Jewish-Palestinian dialogue group, and I began to meet Palestinians. And in fact, the chapter in the book that talks about this, the journey, begins with a line: "My journey into Palestine began in San Diego." It was the first time. Now, I was born and raised in Jerusalem, which is supposedly a mixed city, but of course it's completely segregated. It's a very racist city. Anybody who's been to the South and knows what blacks have experienced here in this country knows it's this. You can live in geographically very close, but you're completely segregated. So the first time I met Palestinians was here in this country, and then I began to travel into Palestinian towns and cities and so forth. So that was our response, my response to the tragedy. The equivalency between Black Lives Matter and the reality of blacks in America, and that in Palestine, of course, there are many similarities. I think the reality of blacks in America has been going on for, 400 years? And so it's much more severe. And a while ago, I have a Black Lives Matter shirt that I wear from time to time, and I was walking into a restaurant, and somebody came out of the restaurant and looked at me and said, Italian lives matter too. And I said, yes, but Italian lives do matter. That is the whole point of the t-shirts. In America, black lives do not matter. That is why we wear the t-shirts. The response that somehow all lives matter and Italian lives matter, that's not the issue. The issue is that in America, black lives never mattered, and they still don't matter. And there's a racist reality in this country that most people choose, particularly white people, don't want to touch. And it offends them to see somebody calling them out on it. And that is the reality. By the way, Native American lives don't matter, or they never mattered either. And brown lives don't matter either. And when we see what the U.S. government has been doing to the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm sure some of you know, again, some of us are old enough to remember, this year was recently, the Black Panthers Party was commemorating their 50th anniversary in Oakland. I happened to be in Oakland at the time. What was done to them, and what is happening now in North Dakota, and we compare that to what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, it makes me think when Americans, especially American governments, talk about the shared values that we support Israel because of the shared values. These are the shared values. Racism, colonialism, black lives don't matter, Arab lives don't matter, Muslim lives don't matter. This is the reality. And these are the shared values. They like to call them Judeo-Christian values. These are values of racism and colonialism. And the parallels are, I think, evident. I'm sure many of you know there's a Black Lives Matter delegation that went to Palestine. And the connections are clear, and I think that this connection has to unfold and create more joint events and kind of a stronger coalition, because it's obvious, and we see the methods. American police are learning how to fight protests from the Israelis, and how to, of course, the police is very militarized and so forth. But it's a very different reality if you're a black in America than if you're a white in America, and most whites will never know. Just like most Israelis will never know, because we never walk into the sphere of the other. To go into a black neighborhood is dangerous because they're criminal, because they're druggies, because they're going to rob us and rape us and kill us. Of course, now people say that about Mexicans as well. That's exactly why Israelis don't go into Palestinian towns. When I'm there, every single time I'm there, when I go to a Palestinian town, when I go to see friends in East Jerusalem, people that I know say, "You shouldn't go. Don't you know it's dangerous? Don't you know it's dangerous?" You know, because you walk into that other sphere that our entire life we were told that is inhabited by people who are irrational and violent and incapable of, civilized discourse. So most Israelis will never take that journey. Most whites will never take that journey. That's why white people are offended when you say Black Lives Matter. It's not that white lives don't matter, it's that black lives do not matter, and that's why everybody's got to wear that t-shirt, to make it absolutely clear and remind people that this is the case. What's the third question? Oh, why can't there be a two-state solution? I thought I explained it pretty well, but I'll make another attempt. The state of Israel was founded on an ideology, a racist, colonialist ideology called Zionism. And the Zionists created like a three-legged stool, if you will, upon which it sits. The first one is that we, the Jews who live in the world today, are the descendants of an ancient tribe that used to live in Palestine some 3,000 years ago, called the Hebrews. Now, if you look at my skin color, I think you can tell that I've never had a descendant that came from that part of the world. I think it's pretty obvious. So the claim that somehow Jews today are all the descendants of the ancient Hebrews is the first myth. The second myth says, and therefore, by the way, we have a right to return. That's our homeland. The second myth is that the Bible is our history book. In other words, the Bible is not a book of faith, it is our history book, the Old Testament. Okay? Now, take a look, if you have children or grandchildren who are in high school and are studying world history, what they learn about the ancient world. They learn about the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Egyptians and the ancient Hebrews. It's like you learn about the sun and the moon and a grain of sand, as though they are equivalent, as though there's some kind of symmetry. And everything they learn about the ancient Hebrews is biblical. Abraham, Moses, King David, King Solomon, there's not a single piece of evidence that any of them have ever existed. I mean, historical scientific evidence. It's not history, it's religion. But that's what's taught in schools. That's the other myth, that the Bible is somehow our history book. And they basically, what they did was that they secularized the Bible. And the third myth is that the Jews are somehow a nation. Not just people of different nations that share religion, but that all Jews are a nation. So the Yemenite Jews and the Moroccan Jews and the Iraqi Jews and the Polish Jews and the Russian Jews and the American Jews are all part of the same nation, which is of course a complete myth. And these three myths are what the state of Israel sits on. That's what the Zionist ideology sits on. The entire land belongs to the Jews. The entire land belongs to the Jews. This is the ideology upon which the state of Israel was founded and still exists today. There is no difference between West Bank, East Bank, the Galilee, the Negev. It's all the same. It's all our country. It's all ours. The Palestinians are unwanted aliens, and they need to leave or die. It is our country. When the basic ideology is that, who exactly and how exactly is there going to be another state, and where? There is no West Bank. There was a West Bank for 5 minutes after Israel occupied it, but very quickly, within hours, Israeli bulldozers came in and destroyed Palestinian towns, Palestinian neighborhoods, Palestinian cities, and began building massively for Jews only on that land. But of course they did that. Why wouldn't they? That's exactly what they did in every other part of Palestine in 1948. And forever, since then, all the way to today. So there can't be a two-state solution because there's no place for another state. There is no room where you can say, okay, this is Palestine, this will be Israel. There's no such place. It's geographically impossible, and as long as the state of Israel exists, there will not be any recognition of Palestinian rights. It's like you had to get rid of apartheid in South Africa before you could start taking care of black South Africans. You couldn't take care of black South African rights while apartheid was still operating. That was the first step, getting rid of the apartheid regime. Fighting racism in this country, of course, we're a long way from ending racism in this country, but at least Jim Crow is gone, the laws. The racism is here, but at least they got rid of the laws, so there's one step forward. Legally. It's the same thing, you have to get rid of the system that creates the injustice, and then you can start taking care of the injustice and fixing things. And providing restitution, which, by the way, blacks in America have never received. Compensation for 400 years of slavery. That's another one of these things you're not supposed to talk about. It's taboo. You can never talk about blacks' rights for restitution and so forth, reparations. So, that is why a two-state is not possible in Palestine. It's either going to be a Jewish state like it is today, or it's going to be a democracy.
Another round. And two questions are almost the same. So here's number one, stated slightly two different ways. What would right of return look like? What would a one-state solution look like? And how would Israeli Jews be part of it? Putting two into one. Here's the first one. What would right of return look like? And what would a one-state solution look like? They're kind of the same. And how would Israeli Jews be part of it? Number two, will you say something about the role of the UN in the establishment of Israel? And number three, would you compare the Gaza Strip and the Warsaw Ghetto?
Okay. Once again, thank you, Leslie, for your courage. Appreciate it. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for holding this. Thank you for not backing down. That's what it takes. That's the kind of courage that it takes. So, the first question: what would the right of return and the one-state solution look like? You know, I'm not a prophet, but I can tell you what I would foresee based on things that have happened in other places. In other words, in many ways, we have an advantage on the issue of Palestine because we don't have to reinvent the wheel. All these things have happened. We've seen racist regimes fall in the last 50 years in Europe. We've seen them fall. We saw fascism fall in Europe. We saw the Soviet Union fall. We saw dictatorships in Latin America fall. We've seen all these things happen. The way I foresee it happening is that with the increasing influence of the BDS movement and the increasing willingness of activists like all of you to come and listen and participate in groups going to Palestine and so forth, basically what's called the Palestine Solidarity, the state of Israel, just like apartheid in South Africa, will collapse. And just like in South Africa, you know, when President de Klerk stood up and declared what he declared and basically ended apartheid, he didn't do it. The whites in South Africa didn't just wake up one morning feeling great about blacks. They had nowhere to go. It was over. Black supremacy in South Africa, at least legally, had to end. They were forced into it. They couldn't play rugby, they couldn't go to the Olympics, they couldn't be seen or heard anywhere. It was done. you know? And South Africa is much bigger, richer, and stronger than Israel will ever be. They had uranium and nuclear weapons and God knows what else. So there was a lot of opposition here in this country to the movement to end apartheid. So people like to forget that, but it wasn't until in the late 80s that the United States government actually began supporting this idea. So there will be an Israeli prime minister who, like de Klerk, will stand up to the podium one day. And what de Klerk said, he said Nelson Mandela and the other prisoners will be freed unconditionally. And free one person, one vote elections were scheduled. And that is the end of apartheid. And that, I believe, is exactly what's going to happen. There will be an Israeli prime minister who will step up and say, we are releasing all the political prisoners. We are completely taking apart the military occupation of parts of Palestine. And we are allowing a free one person, one vote elections. And that will be the end of this racist regime called the State of Israel. So now, once that happens, once there are elections, once there's a legislature that represents the people, once there's an executive, a government that represents the people, at that point, and only at that point, once Palestinians have a say, will they be able to deal with all the issues? And I believe the first issue is, of course, the right of the refugees to return and to reclaim their land and be paid restitution. That is the first thing. Now, we've seen refugees repatriated around the world before. We don't have to invent anything new. And God knows we have $38 billion that we can use. Some of that can certainly be given to the refugees. A couple of million to each refugee family. They'll come back and they'll be fine. You know, I don't think there's a problem with that at all. It just has to be done, and we have to have a political reality that allows it. There has to be a government and a legislature that allows it to happen. And then, of course, what happens to the people, the Israeli Jews who lived in Palestinian homes for seven decades and had restaurants and businesses and boutiques and cafes and galleries in these beautiful Arabic homes, and they're so exotic, and people have been making money off of them while the Palestinians are sitting in refugee camps. You know, that has to be taken care of too. But again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The money is there, the ability is there, it just has to be done. And none of it can happen as long as there's a state of Israel. As long as the apartheid regime exists, rights for Palestinians will always be denied. They will never be recognized. So that really is the first step. And once that's accomplished, again, like I said, the right of return, restitution, and so forth, the rights to the land, the rights to the water, and so forth will have to be dealt with. But that is the first step. That is the place from which everything else can happen. How Israeli Jews will be part of it, the same as whites in South Africa were part of it, and the same as whites in the South were part of it. You know, they'll get up in the morning, and they'll have a Palestinian prime minister, and they'll have to get up and go to work like everybody else. And their kids are going to go to school, and they'll have Palestinians classmates, and they might have a Palestinian teacher or a principal, and the sky's not going to fall because it doesn't, you know? And that's going to be the reality. And Jews will not have preferential treatment and exclusive rights anymore. And Palestinians will have exactly what they deserve and hopefully more. And the reality is, I believe that it's not only true in Israel. I mean, I think it's true in all racist societies. It will take generations, if not forever, for Israelis to be able to fully compensate Palestinians for the injustice that they suffered. I don't know if a racist society can ever pay back, duly pay back what is owed to the oppressed. But, you know, this will be a step in the right direction. And I don't think, you know, there's always an attempt to bring them in, to convince them, to dialogue with them. Racist societies never give up their privilege unless they're forced to. They have to be hit on the head, they have to go on, be brought down to their knees, and then they get up and they just have to play along. And that's the way it's going to have to be with Jews in Israel. That's the way. The UN role, you know, it's interesting. Israel has there was only one time in history that the state of Israel, there's only one thing that the state of Israel accepts from the UN, and that's the United Nations partition plan of Palestine, which recognized a Jewish homeland in Palestine. From that moment on, you know, from the first Israeli prime minister all the way to today, Israel has absolutely no regard for the United Nations. The United Nations can pass resolution after resolution after resolution. Nobody cares, because they don't have the teeth to enforce it anyway. Nobody cares. So that's the end of that. They accepted that as something, and they always say, well, the United Nations resolution, the United Nations recognize the state of Israel, that's it. But from that moment on, it's over. So the United Nations has no teeth. You know, comparing Gaza to Warsaw, I don't know about comparisons. The Gaza Strip is a horror, is a humanitarian disaster, and it's been like that for 7 decades. You know, I don't think even the Warsaw Ghetto was, existed that long. So I don't know if comparison is the right thing here. There's a humanitarian disaster. It has to be taken care of. There's a terrible injustice that has to be dealt with. And there's no question that Gaza is a massive concentration camp. There's no question about that.